Howdy folks, welcome back to the shop here at Project Pine Hills. Today we're talking about these Klein Tools 7-inch Lineman Pliers. You can see the part number is J2001-7NE. Now the 7 stands for 7-inch and the NE is for New England. That's the style, shape, and size of the head of these pliers. You can see they're rated for heavy duty cutting. We're going to talk about that. And they're forged in the USA with USA steel. A quick look at the back. You can pause the video and check out the specs. You see they're heavy duty, so they're rated for ACSR. That's aluminum conductor steel reinforced. That's extra hard screws, nails, and most hardened wire. You also notice Klein does a special tempering to the handles of the pliers that helps absorb the snap. Let's check them out. All right, let's check out these pliers. Recently, I was talking with Doc over at the Last Best Tool YouTube channel, and he asked me if I'd ever seen this 7-inch pair of Klein Lineman Pliers. And I told him I hadn't, and I didn't think much of it because I'm so accustomed to using a 9-inch pair. And with these long handles, they give you the leverage for cutting and twisting wire, and I thought, why would you ever want something different? But then I got to thinking, 7-inch pliers are very popular. These are the Knipex Cobra pliers, the 180mm pair that are very popular. And part of that's because they open up really wide. If you compare these to this USA-made pair of Craftsman pliers that are 10 inches in size, you can see that the Knipex jaw opening actually opens wider than a 10-inch pair of tongue and groove pliers. So that's one of the reasons these are so popular. They punch way above their weight. But there are a lot of tools that are that size that are popular. The Knipex Pliers wrench, the Talon grip pliers from Snap-on, these are the 7-inch version. And a lot of 7-inch tools are a little bit longer than 7 inches. For example, these are the 8-inch pair of Knipex twin grips. They're actually 8¼ inches, but also very popular. But again, a smaller pair of pliers. Here's a pair of compact bolt cutters from Knipex, also 8 inches. These actually measure in at 8 inches. Here's a pair of 7-inch long Snap-on Lineman Pliers. You can see that part number there, the 57 AHLP. And anybody I know who's used these really likes them and have been very happy with them. So I thought, a lot of people probably would like these Lineman Pliers if they tried them, right? They can fit into tighter spaces, they're lighter, they take up less space in your bag, they give you a little more dexterity. So Doc had nominated these as Pliers of the Year, and I'll have to agree with him. They really are nice. It's something I think you have to try, similar to the Knipex 180s, and then you start to realize that something smaller can work for you and would take up less space in your bag. So let's check these out. So, of course, the first thing I was thinking about was the leverage for cutting. Let's see how it cuts this 12-gauge Romex. It's pretty good. A little bit of snap there, but that's to be expected. Let's compare that to these Snap-on 7-inch pliers. Try to cut the same 12-gauge Romex here. A little less snap. And part of that has to do with the pivot point. I know Doc had mentioned that in his video about these. If you look at the rivets on these two pliers, you'll notice that the pivot point, which is in the center of the rivet, is closer to the cutting knives on this Snap-on. You notice the Klein's here, it's a little further away, the center of this rivet. And so I think these could be improved if this rivet was moved up to the cutting edge. But Klein, of course, is aware of this because if you look at the 8-inch version of these pliers, this is the exact same version and model number, but in an 8-inch pair. You can see they've moved this pivot point closer to the cutting edge and made these a high leverage version of the pliers. So it's a great 8-inch pair of pliers here the Klein has, but you can see they've made these high leverage. So it'd be great to see the same treatment on these 7-inch, but I do agree with Doc. They deserve that nomination for Pliers of the Year. I didn't know about them. Let me know in the comments if you knew these existed. I certainly didn't, and a lot of the folks I've talked to as well. Now Klein has these both in the comfort grip handle, and you also have the plastic dip handle here. It comes down to personal preference. I do think the comfort grip's good for this size. Pick the one that suits you best. If you want a little more leverage, you can go with 8-inch. The great thing is these pliers are really identical. Like if you look at the 7-inch here, all they've done is they've scaled down the 9-inch Lineman Pliers. They didn't really trade anything away. And let's compare the tips here of the two. This is the 9-inch compared to the 7-inch. You can see that there's not a lot of difference there. Let me get them lined up here. Yeah, if we get them lined up, you can see that there's just a little bit of difference in width there. So you still get a lot of the characteristics of the 9-inch pliers, with a little bit shorter handle. But again, I think people really like that. Let's compare them to the 7-inch pair of Snap-ons. If you look at the head of the pliers, you'll see that the Kleins are a little bit wider than the Snap-on 7-inch pliers, and let's compare the head shape of these two pliers. You can see that on the Kleins, this New England style head, they've finished it in 4 different places. They've sanded it here, here, and on both sides of this to knock the corners off. They haven't done that on the Snap-ons. The Snap-on still has its corners and it's just been finished flat down to the end. So different finishing process there. I'm not sure if that's due to this New England style or not. If you know, let me know in the comments. Now, if you compare the jaw openings, you can see the Snap-ons open wider. If you compare the jaws on the two pliers, you can see the crosshatch knurling on the Snap-ons a little more aggressive than the Klein and extends down a little bit farther here. The Klein has a deeper set of jaws though. Like back here where they're smooth, you can see they come back farther. If you look at the cutting knives on each of the pliers, they're pretty much identical. I mean, let's compare them to the Cobra pliers here. There's a 7-inch pair, or the 180 Cobras. Stand them up here. You can see they're about the same size. So let's get a quick measurement on the 7-inch pair of Klein Lineman Pliers. And you can see right there, they come in at about 7.5 inches. So, and that's true of most pliers. They typically come in a little longer than the actual measurement they sell it with. So I think it gives you the precision and the dexterity you're looking for if you use them. Now I think, if you're working with heavier wire, I think you're going to want your 9-inch pair, of course, right? I'm not saying you would use this instead of a 9-inch pair. I'm just saying they're a nice add. Very similar to the 7-inch pair of Knipex Cobra pliers. If you're working with really heavy gauge wire like fencing wire, for example, you're going to want to use the 9-inch. But if you're working with a highly flexible conductor like copper, these would work just fine, right? You can twist wire, cut wire, no problem. They're going to do that. So I really think it's something that people just haven't been aware of or checked out. So like I said, let me know in the comments if you were aware these existed. I'd be interested in knowing. Here's another thing I found interesting is I have this 8-inch pair here from Klein, and you can see that, as I mentioned earlier, they're a high leverage version of the pliers. The Klein also has an 8-inch pair here. If you look, you can see that the rivet's farther away, right? You can see the model number is a little different. This is the D201 versus the J2001-7NE. Again, it's that same New England head, but you can see here that one has the pivot point much closer to the cutting edge, so it's going to have a little more leverage or be designated as high leverage. Klein also makes this pair here. If you check it out, you'll see that here we've got the D201, right? And then the D213, and of course the D213 is high leverage and the D201 is not, right? The rivet is further away from the cutting jaws right here. So that changes the fulcrum. Of course, the high leverage design's been part of the Klein Lineman Pliers for a long time, right? You can see here on these D213s, these are a few decades old. You can notice here that this pivot is close to the cutting edge. Klein's had that for a long time. Another thing that's interesting about Klein pliers is they actually have 3 different ways of hardening them, right? They heat treat the entire pliers to harden them, but then they use electromagnetic induction just to heat and harden the cutting knives, for example, on these pliers. So that's a very targeted hardening that's just around this area. It goes only a certain depth into the metal, and it doesn't extend to the rest of the pliers to make them too hard. So Klein actually tests for that. And then they also have a laser hardening method they use on some of their pliers, and they temper these handles. That's something a lot of people overlook. These handles are specially tempered to take out the snap when you're cutting wire. A lot of people cut with Klein Lineman Pliers and they say, oh, I want them to cut like a pair of Kleins when I cut. Well, that cut right there where the wire doesn't eject, right? You see it's still on the pliers. The wire doesn't eject, doesn't make a loud noise. You don't feel it in your hand. That's because they're high leverage and they've tempered these handles. The tempering of these handles has literally made these more flexible, not to the point where they flex too much, but to the point where you don't feel the snap near as much as you would in, say, another pair of pliers. So that's something that's unique to Klein Lineman Pliers. And of course, the 7-inch pair has those as well. So let me know in the comments if you've seen these before. I'd be interested in knowing if you've tried these. I do think they deserve the nomination for Pliers of the Year. I'm interested to see how that turns out. I'll have a link to these in the video description. And please remember to like and subscribe. All those actions help me to continue to bring content to you here on the Project Pioneers channel. And with that said, I'll catch you in the next video.